Thank you all for coming, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Governor Madeleine Kunin and welcome her back to Middlebury. Madeleine Kunin was one of the original superwomen, and who not only knew she was capable of great public service, but was able to fight and achieve it. Her tenure as first lieutenant governor and then governor of Vermont spanned my own years growing up in Vermont of high school and college and the beginning of graduate school. And in the background of my own schooling, pretty apolitical at the time, there was this amazing example of the first woman governor of Vermont, a well-educated mother of four, Jewish, Democrat, in a historically Republican state. Since leaving office in 1991, Governor Kunin served in the Clinton administration as the first Deputy Secretary of Education, and then as United States Ambassador to Switzerland, the country of her birth. She's also the founder and board president of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, an organization which she began after visiting Bulgaria as an election observer in the early 1990s. Madeleine Kunin's story has been chronicled in two autobiographical books on women and public service, Living a Political Life, an account of her lieutenant governor and governorship, and the current and very timely book, Pearls, Politics, and Power. I'm interested in well, not just the alliteration, but the order in which you put those things. Pearls, Politics, and Power. More importantly, how women can win and lead. It's a wide-ranging book that I recommend to all of you, looking at women leaders historically and comparatively at both the international and national level, and talking candidly about issues of family, children, and what we now call work-life balance. Despite being a woman who has always prized privacy, it is an honest and forthright and welcome book in a world that currently, this last week especially, has a little too much sleaze in it for many of us. Governor Kunin advises women not to shrink from power or to be afraid of incomplete resumes, but to tackle problems that they see around them with both integrity and grit. She counsels that they pay attention to both process, the political process, and substance, to both procedural justice and substantive justice, and that they learn patience while also not being afraid to want power. You have a great sentence in there where you say, women are not supposed to want power just like they're not supposed to want sex. It's one of my favorite quotes. Growing up with Governor Kunin walking in the St. Albans Maple Festival Parade each year, I didn't pay attention enough to her achievements. I am like so many of my own generation who took for granted that power could be ours and forgot the work it took for others to make that possible. In some sense, I'm standing here more for my mother, who's of your generation, than for me. My mother, who never had a career, but who just on the phone this morning said to me, "You're going to get to introduce Madeleine Kunin? Tell Madeleine she's marvelous and we love her," from St. Albans. So there I go. And I think in the background of some of those more careerless women, you were a kind of model. In fact, one of your interviews, she talks about walking down a parade on a street, it might have even been St. Albans, and seeing a woman on a porch just kind of go like this. And you said, I'm here it's for that woman on the porch that I'm there. So we forgot that it took the work of others to make our achievements possible. So thank you, and thank you also for reminding us that life is long and it's full of potential.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so glad I came where they love me.
A message from St. Albans.
Right. Tell your mother I love her, too. I think I've got this on. Am I wired? Yes. Okay. Well, it is really great to come back to Middlebury. And you know, I had a very good few years here in the political science department. And you know, worked with wonderful people like Allison Stanger and her husband Michael and all the people in the department and people who keep us going like Martha and people who do the daily work and people here from the community. Well, the timing of this is just perfect. About 20 minutes ago, I signed my first copy of the book. So I didn't think at first when I got this invitation that I would have books. And my other, more of a memoir, Living a Political Life, I was working for the federal government at that time, and the ethics rules were very strong, at least for us. Maybe not for everybody else, but I wasn't allowed to promote my book. And I couldn't even go to a bookstore to promote it. So now they're right over there, and I'll be happy to sign them afterwards. It is also great to see some people like Gail Smith, who I discussed this book at the very beginning, and we had some very good talks. And I don't know if Amy Sheldon is here. There, Amy, I didn't recognize you right away. It's been a while. It was a while. Yes, but there's some good quotes of yours in this book. So, and I hope to get to them. And I'd also like to introduce my husband, John Hennessy, because he really encouraged me to write. And not only did he encourage me, he read what I wrote, he did some research, and he proofread what I wrote. And that's true love. I really thank him, and I also would like to thank former students I had at Middlebury. I wasn't on this subject then, but I think it was kind of in a gestational period, even though I hadn't begun to write. But I really appreciated the students at Middlebury. And all of you who are professors know you learn a great deal from your students. And one of the questions is, why did I write this book? Well, a very simple answer is I wanted to pass the torch to the next generation. Because, I don't know if I dare say this, but lately, old white women have gotten a bad rap. And I think it's the responsibility of our generation to inspire the next generation. And that is really the purpose of this. And how do you do that? You can't just give a speech. So instead of telling my own story, I tell part of my own story, sort of the post-gubernatorial phase in the first chapter. But I really felt strongly that I could get the message out by telling other people's stories about why they get into this world of politics, what the obstacles are, and what the rewards are. And we don't often talk about the rewards. We don't often even mention that it's fun to be involved in politics. So let me just read you an excerpt from the introduction to set the tone. It's time for a call to action for new political leadership to emerge from the women of America. The stories of the women in this book, and thousands of others like them who hold elective and appointive offices all over America, are making a difference. Others work for change in their communities as volunteers, as activists. The problem is that they are too few. We need their voices as grandmothers and mothers, wives and widows, daughters and sisters, to be heard in the political debate about the future of our country. The debate may be raucous, the process complex, and the rewards not assured, but we cannot stay out of it. Each woman's experience changes the nature and content of the conversation. Politics, as Hillary Clinton said, she said this to me in the book, is not for the faint of heart. And certainly this primary tells us that. But politics is where the decisions are made that determine whether our children will go to war, whether our parents will live in security, and whether Earth itself will continue as we know it. We have been bystanders to history for too long. We have no more excuses. We are educated, we care, and we are ready to enter the arena. Times have changed since I was first elected governor of Vermont in 1984. When I walked into the executive office the morning after the election, I scanned the row of somber male governors' portraits with names like Ebenezer and Erastus. They stared down at me as if to say, "What are you doing here?" When 9-year-old Melissa Campbell visited the Vermont State House in 2006 and came upon my portrait, she exclaimed, "Finally, a woman. It's about time." So this is the feeling, it's about time. This is what Melissa thought. This is what a lot of us think. But when you look at the facts and figures, it's not happening. When I was elected, I thought I was leading a parade. There would be hundreds of women elected, thousands of women elected. And I look behind me today, and there are only a few. How few? Well, in doing the research for this book, I came upon an interesting figure of 16%. I came across it 3 times. 16% is the percentage of women today in the United States Congress, and that is an all-time high. 16% is also the figure in 2007 of the percentage of women in parliaments around the world. 16% appeared a 3rd time, and that is the percentage of women according to Catalyst, an organization that studies women in the corporate world, does research, helps place women on corporate boards. 16% is the same percentage for women in top corporate positions, on boards as vice presidents. And that is in light of the fact that women have comprised 50% of management positions, middle management positions, for at least 10 and possibly 15 years. So there's a question. Why are we stuck there? Why are we stuck at that level? The figure 16% becomes a little more disconcerting when you look at where the United States ranks in terms of women in our Congress compared to women in parliaments around the world. Out of 187 countries, the United States ranks 69th. And I recently received the latest figures from the United Nations of the ranking of about 140 countries. And it gets worse, I hate to say. The United States of America is 71st in this ranking. I won't tell you the top country to the end of the talk, but the number 2, 3, and 4 are kind of interesting. Sweden, you might expect. Finland, you might expect. The 4th one you might not expect. I didn't. Argentina. Argentina has 40% women. They also have a quota system, as many Latin American countries do. But of course it raises a number of questions. You know, machismo in Latin America, if my Spanish is it machismo, is still alive and well. And yet Latin American countries are doing much better than we are. They also now have 2 female presidents in Chile and Argentina. It's so tempting to go off on that subject, but I'll bring it back. What are some of the reasons? You know, we have to ask the question, why? As I said in the introduction, American women are educated. As you know from your own experience, women comprise 56% of the students in undergraduate school and are getting very close to that in graduate programs. In my day, women didn't play sports. You are what we now fondly call the Title IX babies. You know how to compete, you know how to win, you know how to lose, to pick yourself up, to have all that teamwork, which was often considered essential to be in politics. So you have the benefit of that. And you've been brought up, by and large, by parents who have equal expectations of their daughters as they do of their sons. You know, the old days when if there was a choice who should go to college, who should have a career, and there wasn't enough money, the girls stayed home. This is obviously no longer true. So I try to explore what is going on here, and I wish I had a simple answer. I don't have a simple answer, but in talking to people, there are obviously some barriers that seem to be higher for women than they are for men. And they probably are higher for all outsiders, whether it's minorities, because our system is, by and large, a white male system. Well, I got a little insight when I talked to Girls State. Anybody know what Girls State is? One of the great things the American Legion does, the American Legion Auxiliary, brings high school juniors, not all states, but in Vermont and a number of states, where they can have a mock legislative session. So these were the chosen kids, who did best to come to the State House. And I threw out the word politics. And I said, what comes to mind when I say politics? Slimy, lying, and boring immediately came to mind at Girls State. Two responded differently: making laws and representing the public. And I was pretty happy to hear them. But then I sort of went down the line. Would you think of running for governor? Would you think of running for the legislature? Would you think of running? Finally, we got to school board, and hands went up. But their ability to see themselves, even though they were seated in the State House and learning about politics, their ability to see themselves in positions of authority was still severely curtailed. So there is some kind of mindset that must be inculcated quite early. And then, of course, you could name some of the other barriers: raising money, loss of privacy, being attacked, being criticized. All those are difficult things to overcome. And even as I'm speaking, I wish I had a better answer for you. The flip side is that some women do overcome them. And any of you who are students of history, even the civil rights movement, not too long ago, know that people risked their lives to create change in the political system. And women all over the world, and men, are risking their lives by speaking out. Sometimes people still ask me, what made me political? Why did I pick up one foot after the other and step over that line from being a private person to a public person? And, there are different levels of answers. Some are at the top level, some I have to dig deeper. At the top level, it was 1972 when I first ran. And there were two political movements at that time: the environmental movement and the women's movement. And both captured my imagination. I wanted to be engaged. The women's movement really gave people of my generation permission to step out. I had 4 children, fairly young. I had not been involved. I'd been a journalist, but I was pretty much a full-time mother when I decided to run. And it was the women's movement that said, you can do this now. And there was also an issue at that time called the Equal Rights Amendment that I had lobbied for in the Vermont legislature. And one day I said, instead of knocking on the door from the outside and pleading with these guys to give us equal rights, why don't I step inside and sit at the table and have a vote? And fortunately, in Burlington, Vermont, at that time, that was possible. Burlington had a few more Democrats then than the rest of the state. But the environmental movement had the same challenge. It was an exciting time, and I don't want to get too sentimental because we also have exciting times and important times today. But I wanted, again, to be on the inside to hold on to Act 250, which is a law in Vermont that regulates large-scale development. But so that impelled me. I had issues I cared about. And the women's movement also gave me what we now term a support group. There were a few of us who formed a Vermont Women's Political Caucus. We sat around, we gave speeches, why don't women run? And then a couple of us looked at each other and said, why don't you run? Why don't you run? So several of us did. But this group was very important. And I could elaborate on that later. But there was also, it wasn't until several years later that I sort of peeled off the layers of the onion and came across something else. Part of my background, the fact that I came to the United States as a child with my mother and my brother and didn't speak English. We left Switzerland because of the threat of the Holocaust. And I had lost family, not in Switzerland, but in Germany. My father was German in Germany and France and Holland. And I grew up with the story of the Holocaust, and it had a profound impression on my thinking and my feeling. And I realized that I lived in a different time than those who died. Both as a woman and as a Jewish woman, I could speak out without fear, and that I was privileged in that sense, and that I had to use that privilege. I also got, and some of you I know were born in other countries and have parents from other countries, you probably heard this phrase at your dinner table as I did mine: anything is possible in America. And that phrase, even though it's a cliche, and even though it's not 100% true, is still true in this country more than any place else. That gave me a kind of optimism. And to get into the political system, you have to be optimistic. You have to be optimistic enough to feel that you can create change. And sometimes I look at it as a very careful balance between anger on one side and optimism on the other. You have to be angry enough to want to change something. And then in between, you have to have some imagination to imagine it being different than it is. And then you go over to the other side, and you have to be optimistic enough, both about yourself and the system, that it will respond to your concerns, your speaking out, whatever it is. If you're too angry, you fall by the wayside. You either become a total radical and revolutionary, want to burn the place down, or you become totally tuned out. You know, why bother? Won't make a difference. The good news about the times we're living in right now, and I congratulate the students, is for a multiple of reasons. We seem to be at a resurgence of political optimism and political anger, and they are intertwined. I mean, we are angry at the system we are in and the policies we are living with and the policies you will inherit. But I think both the Democratic candidates, one somewhat more so than the other, but both of them have said, we have a different future. And with your involvement, we can create it. My hope is that we hold on to that. But that's maybe we can bring out in the question system. So there are people, you know, I was, you know, timing is very important in politics. And it's just, I was born in a good time when I had these issues and I had this support, and I had a kind of feeling that I could get something done if I took the risks. Now, just getting back to the barriers, some people look at the system, and it's not surprising that they do, I mean, there's some very unattractive parts of politics. So we have to acknowledge that. One of Amy Sheldon raised the question. She said to me when I was talking to her, we have to support each other in playing with the jerks. Now I go on and I say, now many politicians look and act like jerks when viewed from the outside, but are transformed into colleagues on the inside. The difference between looking at the jerks from the outside and negotiating with them on the inside is that most, not all politicians, are more nuanced than their caricatures. Politicians of opposing views, and this is very hard for people on the outside to understand, respect and often like one another if they keep their word, provide reliable information, and are friendly. Forming trusting relationships with colleagues, as I did with Rohatyn, is one of the traits of successful legislators. And this may surprise you, but one of the parts I loved about politics when I was in the legislature, and this is where I learned the most, is meeting people with totally different ideas than mine, totally different backgrounds. And it's not only fellow politicians. If you go to factories, if you walk down the main street, if you go to people's homes, you see life in capital letters. And most of us in our private lives are very insulated. We walk down a narrow path of people who are pretty much like us. And one of the necessities, I think, of becoming involved in politics is to enjoy that kind of diversity of experience and to have empathy. Not necessarily sympathy, but to try to understand why that person can't pay the mortgage, to understand why this child does not get health care. And you can, and there's a great satisfaction when you can fix things. You can't fix everything. There is also great frustration. All those people who disagree with you may vote against you. They will. But not everybody has to agree with you for you to be able to make a difference. And that is something to keep in mind. Now, there are some people who get into the political system who do so in a way that even they did not expect. I'll tell you a little bit about a woman who ran for Congress from New Hampshire in 2006. New Hampshire, unlike Vermont, has 2 Congress people. And Carol Shea Porter lived in the South. The Democratic Party didn't pay attention to her. When she said she was interested in running, the answer from the chair was, well, call me back when you raise $1 million. She never did. She had what I like to call New Hampshire's snowball chance in hell of winning against a strong incumbent. She was a social worker. Her campaign theme was, New Hampshire doesn't have anybody sticking up for just regular people, what I call the 99%, bottom 99% of us. She went to New Orleans after Katrina. She said she put $100 of her own money in a bank account to launch her campaign. My kids said to me, Mom, please don't embarrass us or you. This may sound familiar to some children here. And it was a family affair, her campaign was. Her daughter was her press secretary until she returned to college. And then she said, my mother was unbelievable. She was a Republican for 83 years. She changed her party on her 84th birthday. She'd had enough. While she was filming a commercial in her campaign manager's kitchen, her mother had come to watch. She asked her mother to sit beside her. After we both say the country was going in the wrong direction, my mother looks at the camera, leans forward and says, vote for my daughter. She's a hard worker, and I know she'll do a good job. Well, experts told her, you can't use that commercial, that's terrible. She said, no, it's my mother and me, and it's how we feel about one another and the whole effort. And then everywhere she went, voters then asked her, how's your mom? The feature attraction at a political event was, Carol's mom is coming. So now that she's in Congress, I asked her if it's living up to her expectations. When people ask what it's like in Washington, I say, it's like having Thanksgiving dinner with your dysfunctional family every day. You love them, but there are differences there. Well, she's the exception, but there are a lot of exceptions of people who weren't expected to win. And just like everything in life, if you don't run, you sure aren't going to win, who take the chance. And some of the women I interviewed were very, very courageous. African-American woman who's in the Michigan legislature from Detroit. She was inspired by Martin Luther King. And I won't forget what she said to me. She said, some people get the dream sucked out of them. I'm not going to let them take it from me. So it goes back to some of this optimism. It isn't, you can't just get it automatically. But if you have it, try to hold on to it. I mean, sometimes we think growing up is becoming realistic. And realistic is believing things can't happen or that you can't have an effect. So don't grow up too fast. Hold on to a kind of innocence because it is something precious that does have an impact. Well, one of the things people ask is, how do you become a politician? We have sort of created a mysterious layer around politics, as if it's an elite group. I started out this chapter, lawyers go to law school, doctors go to medical school, accountants study accounting, beauticians go to beauty school, and realtors take a test. How do you become a politician? What is the right preparation? Are there courses a woman should take in high school or college? Is it necessary to get a law degree or a master's degree in public administration? The problem is there is no roadmap or set of global positioning system coordinates to tell a person what route to take to arrive at destination public office. One reason women and many men do not consider running for office is that the process is more opaque than transparent, more mysterious than obvious. And I go on and elaborate about that. People have very different backgrounds. Having some experience in high school, in leadership helps, or college, but not everybody has done that. There's an organization called the Women's Campaign Forum, which is trying to encourage more women to run for office. They're going to do a study of girls in high school to see who gets to be the vice president and who gets to be the president of the class, or who does neither, because they begin to think maybe some of our ideas are formed then. And of course, there are a lot of psychological studies about women holding back, women, Carol Gilligan years ago, women using their voices, being afraid to use their voices, being afraid to speak up, being afraid of being criticized. I find that even today, I talked to a woman not long ago who's thinking about running for the legislature in the future, but she wants to take 2 courses from St. Michael's in political science first. I try to tell her, you don't need that. A man looks in the mirror in the morning while he's shaving, likes what he sees, and says, I think I'll run for the United States Senate. I mean, they're just different expectations. women are very tough on themselves in terms of their qualifications. And that is probably less so for the younger generation, but is still there. We're very literal about what it means to be prepared. And like in most things in life, it isn't so much what you know, but your ability to find out what you don't know. And your ability to figure out the rules of the system. And that's why in the introduction you mentioned substance. At first I thought I had to know everything in the legislature, until a man got up, a legislator, had a bill on financial disclosure for lobbyists. This was in 1974. And I loved the bill. I thought it would change the world. But this one guy got up and made a motion to table the bill. Everybody voted on it, and tabling the bill killed the bill. I didn't know that, but I vowed I was going to learn the rules after that. The other part that you need to know is where the money is. In any organization, those who understand and have access to the budget have the power of the system. So in my second term in the legislature, I had a seat on the House Appropriations Committee. My third term, I chaired the House Appropriations Committee. And I learned more on that committee, and that prepared me to run for governor of the state of Vermont. So there are things you can learn that they don't teach you in courses. And probably, if those of you are thinking you want to know more about politics, the best thing to do is volunteer in a campaign. You may do boring stuff, but if you listen, you learn a lot. And it is the best apprenticeship you can have. And it's fun. It is actually fun. And it's mostly young people who do these things, except I sort of got hooked back into it a couple of weeks ago in the Vermont primary. But what about the presidency? I want to leave time. How much time do we have? Till 5:30? Yeah, so I should stop. But let me just say something about the presidency, because what's difficult the good news is that for the first time in our history, we have an African-American man and a white woman as the top contenders for the Democratic nomination. 2 years ago, in 2006, few of us here would have predicted that that would happen. So if you ever wonder whether this country is open to change, that's part of your answer. The not so good news is that race and gender are still factors, and they are subtle. There are not as many people who are outright racists or outright sexists, though they do appear on some channels and talk radio and places you don't even want your children to look at. So we know it exists. What I have learned over the years is that all of us, women and men, are subject to gender stereotyping because we have all grown up in it. You know, go back to that executive office with the male portraits. We have male portraits in our heads of who is a CEO. We have no portrait of a female president. So there are no role models except maybe governors, CEOs, and presidents of other countries. Germany has a woman president, patriarchal country, Angela Merkel. She's not a feminist, except for one simple fact that all of her close staff are women. But she declares herself definitely not a feminist. I mentioned Chile, Michelle Bachelet, very unlikely person. So yeah, they have some role models. And Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. I could tell you much more about them. They're remarkable women, and very unlikely women to appear on the scene. But in the United States, we somehow have a more complex vision of gender roles. There have been 21 women who have run for president of the United States. You don't know their names, except for a few. Carol Moseley Braun and Shirley Chisholm are the most noteworthy. Elizabeth Dole almost ran, but then withdrew. So none of them were ever taken seriously before. What's remarkable is that we now do have a woman who's taken very, very seriously. Do women in these positions make a difference? You know, this debate is not only about numbers. We want more women in office because we like the idea, and we are a democratic country, and our political system should reflect the population. That is still the most important idea. We should have a Congress that reflects minorities, African Americans, women, you name it. We don't. That's one thing. But there's another reason, that women, in fact, do make a difference on the margins. Some people say, well, you know, you got all kinds of beliefs, and liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. Why would women make a difference? I go back to an earlier point. You don't need 100%. All you need is a slight edge. If you can imagine issues like paid family leave or children's health insurance, which the Scandinavian countries all have, who also have the largest percentage of women and have had historically. If you had 50 women in the United States Senate and 40 of the 50 were for paid family leave, and even 30 of the men, you'd have 70 votes. And most of our issues are decided by very few votes. It could be 49-51, as it is on many, many issues. So you would bring a different result, even though women have a diverse set of views. And why not? I mean, it's crazy to think all women should think alike. It's an unfair expectation. But imagine a United States Supreme Court. We now have one woman who speaks for all American women on the key issues of our time. And in this book, I looked at Sandra Day O'Connor's opinions and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They do bring something different. They personalize it. When women are in positions of power and at the table, they change the conversation. They inject their experiences, whether it's the experience of having been discriminated against on pay, which Ruth Bader Ginsburg talked about, when the Supreme Court voted against a woman in the Ledbetter case because she hadn't filed her complaint within 180 days. And this discrimination had built up over a period of 20 years. Ruth Bader Ginsburg understood the life of that woman. And I talked to the chair of the state Supreme Court justices, and she said, one woman educates the rest of the justices about what it means, what abuse means. And it's stories. You know, statistics are important. Knowledge is important. But stories are compelling. And stories change how people look at the issues. Also, intensity and passion matter. A man can, and thank God many have, advocated childcare, advocated health care, advocated laws about rape. But it's from the personal experience that you become a fighter for these issues. And those who fight hardest are more likely to win. You know, why are certain things at the top of the agenda and why are certain things at the bottom of the agenda? They're at the bottom because not enough people are fighting to get them to the top. Politics is not only competitive as to who gets elected. Politics is competitive as to what gets done. And what gets done depends on the voices of the people who speak out. And that is something I learned and continue to see. Just two more quick points. One more quick point. This generation of young people is caring. In some ways, it isn't like you're not involved in politics because you don't care. You know, every college and university in the United States, almost every high school has public service programs, volunteer programs. We didn't have that. So you're out there because you want to make the world a better place. But it's mostly a one-on-one kind of help, tutoring, meals programs, homeless. It's very laudatory, and I don't want to be misinterpreted as not appreciating that, because I do. I think it's great. But what is missing is the link between those problems, those issues, those people, and the underlying dynamics that created the situation in the first place. And those underlying dynamics are called politics. Now, universities, and I don't want to fault them, but there's a great tendency to want to be pure. Politics is pure. I mean, I got it reversed, Freudian slip. Policy is pure, politics is dirty. And it's risky for the academic community to go into politics. But I think we have to help our students make that transition so that politics is no longer dirty, politics is possible, and politics is where you can get something done. As somebody told me, you know, women are quick to give a contribution for breast cancer research, which is great. But the woman sitting in the United States Congress can get $100 million for breast cancer research. So it's on a grand scale. Yes, as I said at the beginning, it is raucous. You don't always win. It gets dirty. It gets messy. But it also means you can change the way the world works. And it is that belief that is so powerful. I'll end by telling you, anybody guess which the country is? Some of you may have seen the same reports I have. Which is the country that has the greatest percentage of women? You're close. You're close. Rwanda. I knew you wouldn't guess. Rwanda. Rwanda has 48.8% women in their parliament. And I spoke to a senator from Rwanda. And I said, how did this happen? And she did, you know, in the genocide, a lot of men were killed. But she said, we went back and we worked in our communities. We helped build houses. We reunited families. And we wanted to participate in the government. They set a quota for Rwanda in their constitution. They far exceeded the quota. The quota, I think, was 25 or 30%. And then she finally said, we knew we had to do this for the survival of our children. And that is where we are, I believe. We have to do this. We cannot stand by. We have to do this for the survival of our children. Thank you. I'd be happy to take questions. I'm happy to take questions, but those of you who have to go, please, not be offended. I'm not running for office. Yes?
I was wondering what your view on the role of the media is in women's, I guess, participation, because I feel like although you see, I feel like the image that you get from the media is very mixed. I mean, a lot of, just thinking about like TV, for instance, a lot of the shows you're seeing now are of women in higher positions than I guess you would see before, but there's still, you know, a very like sexist image that you see in the media.
Well, it's a very important question, and there's no simple answer. It's better than it was. You know, it used to be, you know, they would only describe how a woman looked, And of course, when Hillary first ran, was her hair. She hasn't dared change her hairstyle because that would be front page news. And there still are some silly stories. Some of you may have caught the Washington Post, written by a woman, story about Hillary's cleavage. One of the bloggers, it was fun reading the blogs about that. One of the bloggers started out by saying the boobs at the Washington Post. The theory is that it wears off, but I think it's more subtle. And I'd like to see an analysis of this primary campaign because, you know, it's subtle in the sense that who's asked questions. I mean, Saturday Night Live had a great comedy, which some of you may have thought funny and others may not have, depending who you're supporting. But, you know, I think Hillary has been treated more roughly. Now, let me make a distinction. I think for a legislative race and even a congressional race, gender has really been reduced and almost disappeared because I think we're used to seeing women there. Certainly the Vermont legislature. Vermont legislature has the highest percentage of women in the country. Guess which state has the lowest? Well, you won't guess, but you probably guess it's the South, and you're right. It's South Carolina, 8.8%. So if you're running for the legislature in South Carolina, it's different than if you're running in Vermont. And we could expand on that, why that is so, why the Southern traditions still seem to have an impact. But yeah, I think the press doesn't quite get it. And that includes women reporters. So it isn't just the male reporters. Sometimes I think the women want to show how tough they are on a fellow woman. So it's there, but it's very hard to counter it because if you complain, you're accused of playing the gender card, whatever that is. But I think the more women who are out there and the different colors of suits they wear and the different hairstyles they have, the less it'll be attention getting. And in some places we're there, in some places we're not. But I urge you to be critics of the press. Really look through this, look at this through critical eyes. Not only on gender issues, but I mean, race is obviously also an issue in this campaign. So it's complex. It goes from really far out, nasty, mean-spirited, biased people like Rush Limbaugh to even mainstream people who don't always know that they are being influenced by gender and race. Yes?
In your experience, how much is politics still an old boys club? Kind of on the different levels, and that women can be involved, but how much have you personally kind of seen that, and has it changed over the years that...
Yeah, it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot. And again, it depends where you are. There's some states that are much more male-dominated than others. But I would say that the old boys club, you know, where you imagine these guys with fat cigars and fat bellies inside the closed, smoke-filled room, I think they're becoming an endangered species. And you can open that door. I think we have more of a feeling that we're not welcome than the reality. But again, I'll give you an example. I spoke at a Women in Politics forum just last week in the Berkshires, and my talk was followed by a panel, and one of the young women there was a newly elected Pittsfield, Massachusetts City Council member. And how did she get there? She got there for a number of reasons. They decided, a group of mostly women, I think it was all women, formed an organization. The acronym was WHEN, And I forget the official meaning of when, but the parlance of when was, we've had enough nonsense. And they were sick of this city council that was corrupt. It was the old boy network. And they decided to encourage women to run. And she was encouraging other women when somebody asked her to run. That's another thing about women, you have to ask them, which is an old-fashioned idea. With text messaging, it may be different. But this group supported her, and they elected several women. And you know how they supported her? She had 3 young children. They took turns providing 2 meals a week while she was campaigning. They took turns carpooling and shepherding her children to soccer games. And they succeeded in changing the old boy climate. So it is more possible than you think. You can break the doors down. And, you know, people, when we say we're tired of the old politics, that includes a lot of things. I mean, I'm sure it includes the horrible chapter in New York State's history last week of Eliot Spitzer. And, you know, a lot of people are thinking, you know, would a woman be in that position? A lot of people are thinking, those poor women who keep standing at their husbands' sides. I think all of you who watch the news at all have that in your head, that expression on Sylva Spitzer's face. I mean, it's horrible to go through. So, yeah, I think it's changing for a lot of reasons. And I think the opportunities are much greater than they appear to be. Now, you may lose if you run. That's a chance you take, but you take that chance in a lot of things, in a lot of parts of life. My first experience at the Old Boys Club was when I became chair of the House Appropriations Committee. I automatically became a member of a special little committee called the Joint Fiscal Committee, which had the chairs of the Appropriations Committee, the chairs of the Taxation Committee called Ways and Means. And I thought, wow, now I've arrived. I got to my first meeting and they elected officers. And went just like this, you know. Chairman, vice chairman, they turned to me and said, secretary. I said, no, thank you. And they then offered me another, which was worse, committee, entertainment committee. I mean, that's when I really had an exercise in self-control. But I realized what had happened. There had been a meeting before the meeting. Have you all been to those meetings? Where everybody's clued in but you? So you've got to get to the meeting before the meeting. Or you simply storm down the door. And either of those things can work. But now there are more numbers. You know, you've got safety in numbers. And that really helps, even though I said 16% is embarrassing. Yes?
How do you feel about quotas for female representation in government or parliament? Some people say it should be based on merit only, while others say it's helpful.
Well, it's an interesting and controversial subject, as you know, but the countries that do have quotas have more women. That's a simple fact. What's very hard, aside from the argument if it should be merit or quotas, interestingly enough, Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States agreed to quotas in their constitution. And Iraq has 25% women. Afghanistan has even more. I think it's 27 point something. So, you know, here we have a Muslim world where women's place in society is very different than it is in ours, and they have more political representation. So what's hard is, how do you do it in our system? Because quotas work basically by parties making lists. And women have to be on those lists and the top of the lists. We don't have that kind of primary party system. So I do talk about a little bit in the book. I think what we can do, though, is be much more aggressive. We should require the political parties to promote women candidates and fund women candidates. Now, they all have language in their platform that sounds great. And if you, both the Republicans and the Democrats, but they don't put it into action. So I think we've been much too complacent, much too polite. We should also ask anyone who's running for president to agree to appoint a cabinet that is 50% women. They'll holler and say, no, I'm only going to appoint the best qualified people. But again, the United States does not do as well as other countries, even in the makeup of the cabinets. And Finland has a female president. I think there are more women cabinet members than men. And Finland was also the first country to not only grant women the right to vote, but to run for office in 1906. And I was at dinner with a Finnish ambassador recently, so I'm really up on this. But Finland is the top country in Europe in terms of education system. Now, that's not an isolated statistic. That is a statistic that is related to their healthcare system, to their lack of poverty for children. We have an atrocious poverty rate in the United States. So it goes back. Will all women vote for good health care? Will all women vote for? No, but a majority will, because those are the gut issues that we live with, many of us, in our lives. So I'd like to see quotas, at least to get us there, maybe not forever, but I don't know how to make it work in the United States except through public pressure. Yeah. Should we stop? One last question. Yes.
I'm a senior. I've been applying for jobs, and in all of the interviews, it's been the woman that's sort of played the role as the bad cop, and the man's played the role as the good cop.
Really?
And I find that at Middlebury also, I think that this might not be just unique to my group of friends, but women are my girlfriends and I are more competitive with each other than our male friends are with each other, or with male and female together. And I was wondering if in your political experience, if you ran into that, why you think it perhaps is, and if there's something you foresee us being able to do about it.
I'm sorry to hear you say that. Yeah, I don't know. You know, it's very hard to generalize because it depends upon the environment. I like to think that women are much more helpful to each other these days than they used to be. You know, the expression in the 60s and maybe the 70s was the queen bee syndrome. You know, the idea that you make it to the top, there's only room for one, and you pull the ladder up behind you. You're describing some of that. But I see, you know, in my personal life, I made a great effort and enjoyed it in mentoring women and helping them and promoting them. So I think the overall climate is better. But now there is competition amongst girls as well as boys. And, you know, one of the reasons that some people theorize that girls don't speak out as much or don't identify, don't stay in leadership positions is that they're afraid of losing their women friends, their girlfriends, as much as their boyfriends. I mean, you used to think it was just the boys, you know. You can't be sexy and beautiful and smart and tough and opinionated. Probably some of that still exists. But also other girls will look at them and say, she's stuck up, or who does she think she is? I think some of that is changing, but we still have to work on it. I think we have to raise our consciousness of how we treat one another and whether we support people who are ambitious. You know, the word ambitious attached to a woman is still considered a pejorative. I mean, Hillary Clinton is accused of being ambitious. Anybody think Barack Obama is not ambitious? I mean, or John McCain, or any of the other guys that were in the primary and fell by the wayside. Yeah, we're all ambitious. But we have to be, one, comfortable with our own own ambition, and I think we have to support one another. I mean, not everybody can run for office, and not everybody wants to, or it's not possible. But we can all be supportive of the people who are out there. We can cook that dinner. You know, I had a woman when I was governor and running for governor, a good friend, who went shopping for clothes for me. And she brought them to my house, and I tried stuff on. She had very good taste. I didn't have time to do that, but she was supportive in that way. So it's not only saying, hey, go for it. It's also really giving you both the moral support and the approval. Maybe that's the most important thing. You know, again, why weren't there? I was the fourth woman elected governor of the United States in my own right. And as I said, I was very, very engaged in the women's movement. And why aren't there more women like me? I just don't know. But part of it is maybe they didn't have the support system. And I did, but I also, you know, it wasn't as simple as I'm portraying it. If you read the first book, Living a Political Life, that is more introspective. Sure, you feel guilty. Sure, you feel you should be one place when you're at another, and you're always juggling. But if you stay home, you're depriving yourself, and you're depriving even your children and your community. Thank you very, very much.